Hello and welcome back. It's Tamsin here at Beginners Quilting Hub. I have to get this off of my design wall. We need to get it made, sewn together, finished, so that I can then layer it up, make it into a sandwich, a quilt sandwich, get it quilted, get it bound, and we can actually display it this Christmas. Now this is part 2 of the little series all about this particular wall hanging. Now, it is called the Welcome Home Quilt by Missouri Star. This was actually a pattern and a project panel that came in the 2024 advent calendar from Missouri Star. So you get a panel inside with all the little doors that you can cut out and use to make your little houses. You also get the fabric to make the trees, and there was some of this green in there as well. I've gone a little bit rogue and I've used my own fabric choices and my own fabric for the centre. So let me show you first off the fabrics that I've used. The main collection that I wanted to use in this quilt is Kitty's Christmas, but is it Kitty's or Kitty? Let me check. Right. The main collection that I wanted to use for my wall hanging was a collection of fabric from Moda called Kitty Christmas, and it was this particular piece of fabric that I wanted to use and then kind of match everything else around it. So this is Kitty Christmas by Urban Chicks of Moda. Isn't it gorgeous? They do this fabric in several different colourways, and I've actually invested in some of the other colours now, what I'll use for different projects. Then chose other pieces that would go with it from the Kitty Christmas range. So there's this one, which is cute. This reminds me of, like, you know, with the bows on it, the silky, what do you call it? Ribbon that cats would play with. Then I've got this one. And what else have we got? Oh, this one's so cute with all the little motifs and, you know, Christmassy bits on here, little stockings and everything. So we've got that one. Then to kind of go with it, I wanted a slightly darker red, so I've got the Christmas is in Town by Sandy Gervais, which has got the little snowflakes on it, and it's this lovely kind of deep red. So I had this in my stash waiting for the perfect project, and clearly this one was it. And I have used in my centre panel, the centre panel is using the pink with the little white snowflakes and the little red dots. And then to make all my corner squares, where they've used the green, I have used this. This is called Threads by, and this is another Moda designer, and it's this one. So this is kind of red and pink to kind of really sit so nicely with the other coordinating fabrics. So those are my kind of basics that I would know I wanted to use, and then I mixed in other colours from my stash. So the first thing I did was kind of created all the little houses and the trees, and I will post a link in the description box below to part 1, which shows you kind of how I did that, how I chose my houses, gives you a better look at the panel, which you may well, after seeing this, want to invest in. So my job today is to get this sewn together. So let me show you what I've done so far. What I've done so far is I have sewn the centre block. I'm going to take these down. I'm going to take these down and show you a better view. So I created this centre block, which I absolutely love. I'd actually just love a quilt made of these blocks. So these are obviously flying geese and half square triangles sewn together, and I've used that Threads fabric and the Kitty Christmas, the pink, to just create this centre panel. And I think the idea is that all the houses are kind of coming into that centre point. So that is my lovely big 12-inch square in the middle. So the next thing I've done is I've sewn this row and this row. So let's take that down and show you. They don't really stick to my design wall now, they're too heavy. So you can see here I've got 2 houses, half square triangles, and then a tree in the centre. So this part here is done, and the bottom section is done, and I've then also sewn the 2 sides. So the next thing I want to do, let's just put these back up. So before I can move much further, I need to get this section sewn together into one unit, because We then need to measure that to add on these borders. Now, in the pattern, it tells you to do that, but it says to do that before you cut your borders. But I wanted to lay it out and make sure that I liked the white. I was tempted to fill this section with the pink or the red, but I'm glad that I stuck with the white because I think it would have been a little bit too much with too much colour. I think the white border actually just breaks up the centre square and then the outer sections. So I'm really pleased that I laid this out and had a look at it first. So what I've done is I've cut 4 lengths of just white fabric. They're not width of fabric. I think they're a lot shorter. But what I've done is I've cut them a lot longer than I need, and I will trim them down once that centre square is made. What I want to do is I want to sew that centre panel. We're going to do that now. Once that's done, I'm going to trim it to a perfect square, and then I want to measure, and then I will cut these border fabrics down to the correct size. Now, the way that I'm working, I'm doing long, short. So the first thing I'm going to do is sew these onto the sides and then the top and the bottom. So I want to do exactly the same with this. So this will be measured this side. Is that right? So the way that I'm going to work is I'm going to do left, right, top, bottom, each side, each round, because there's basically 3 rounds. We've got the first round, the second round, which will be the border, then the third round, which is the final houses. So I'm going to sew this section on, and then this section on, this section on, then this section on. Then we're going to measure it. Then I'm going to cut my strips. Now the strips, I will want one strip to go from here to here, the second one to go from there down to here, and then these strips will cover the bottom of here and go across. So these ones will be slightly longer. Once that's done, we can then add the final row of the houses and it will be done. So let's get going. So the first thing I want to do is pin these houses to either side of the block so that I can sew those on. And I want to try and match up those centre seams so that they all line up, or the best I can. So I'm going to use my nice sharp pins and get them all pinned. I've got both sides pinned like that, so I'm just going to sew up the 2 sides. Now, looking at these, the side that I want to be looking at is this side, because this is the side with the points. If I lose a little bit off of the houses, I'm just losing it off of a nice square edge, so it doesn't matter. But ideally, I want to be sewing and making sure that I'm keeping the points on these outer flying geese. So I'm going to keep that upwards. So I'm going to be looking at this, making sure that when I'm sewing, I'm not losing those points, or as best as I can. That's one side done. So I'm just going to do the other side in exactly the same way. So I've got that centre panel made. Have a look. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew the top row on. And again, matching up these seams. Oh, my scissors have got stuck. Right. So I normally start with the 2 centre seams first and pin those and then work my way out, because that way you just got a little bit more leeway. And I always pin away from myself. Now, some designers will have you pin towards you. I always pin away. I just find my blocks lay flatter, and also I then always know that I'm pointing to the edge that I'm going to be sewing. So if I end up sewing multiple pieces together, if I end up pinning multiple pieces together, I don't forget which way I'm supposed to be going. Naughty me, I sewed over a pin forgot to take that one out. Do not, do not be tempted to sew over your pins. So there's that edge. And now I'm going to pin the final part of this particular piece. So this one. Here we go. So which way around is it? This way around. Here we go. So the pattern says to push all of the... That's not right. Okay, I managed to sew these two half square triangles on the wrong way. I fixed this one and I'm going to show you how I did that without unpicking this whole seam. So basically what you need to do is unpick this seam here and this seam here, and then resew it to this seam and then resew it to this. So I've unpicked that edge there, this one. So I'm now going to unpick this here, and then we can just flip it around and resew it on. I've no idea how I managed to sew these back to front because I had them up on my design wall and I had actually sewn these into lines, and I checked them this morning before I sewed them together. So I'm still sat here really confused, and I've just looked back in my camera roll on my phone to see whether they were wrong, and they were right. Going in that way. So what I will do is sew it to the top one first. So it's going to go, I'm double checking this now, that way. So I will literally fold this apart and sew these two together like that, press those seams, and then I will be back to having the strip like this, and then I can just finish sewing this row by folding it over. It'll be joined down here, and I'm then just going to flip it over and sew across the top, and then when I open it back out it will be the right way. There we go. It's the right way round. I figured out what I did wrong. Can you spot what I did? So this row along the bottom, I'd actually flipped it and had sewn it the other way. So these houses were pointing down, which is one of the options that you can do, but I wanted all my houses to be pointing upwards on the horizontal rows. So when I'd sewn it up the wrong way, it meant that these were incorrect. So I've unpicked it, flipped it around, re-sewn it, and we're now back to how I want it. Now I'm going to sew all of these houses to each other to form this top row, and then I'm going to sew all of these houses here down to the house with the darker blue roof into a strip as well, and then it'll be time to measure that centre and add the borders. So having squared up this centerpiece and measured it in 3 places, it was about 23.5 inches long. So I've cut my border fabric to 23 inches and I'm going to sew that on to either side of the unit, and then I'm going to sew the top and bottom, and then I'll show you what that's going to look like. Everything that could go wrong today whilst filming this video has gone wrong. I sewed those blocks the wrong way, redid them, and then redid them back to the original design. I spilt a drink all over my sewing table, sewing machine, and some of my fabric. Clean that up. I managed to put a needle through my finger, and now I am this far away from finishing the entire wall hanging, and I've run out of thread in my bobbin. Deep breaths, Tamsin, deep breaths. I will get this finished. So I'm now going to load up my bobbin. I'm going to finish this, and I'm going to show you the finished wall hanging if it kills me, and at this rate it might. I mean, we're well and truly empty, aren't we? Right, let's refill the bobbin and then we can get this finished. Almost out of thread as well, look. it is time to get this finished. So I've got the final seam to sew on. So let's get that done. It's quite big. Right, let's get sewing. I've already pinned everything in place, so we are literally ready. If I can find my sewing foot, my pedal, we are ready to get going. So a good thing to think about when you're sewing up large pieces like this is to just try and take away the weight. So what I try and do is move my sewing machine as kind of far over on my sewing table. I try and move my sewing machine as far over on my sewing table as I can, so that I've got lots of space here. So I've got a table here that I can just rest everything on. And then what you want to make sure is that this bit is nice and loose, and the machine can do its thing by pulling through the fabric without having it kind of pulled sideways because of the weight of the sort of big part of the fabric, the bigger part of the quilt project. So here, this is nice and loose, like where the machine is sewing, and I've kind of got everything just kind of bunched up here, and then I'm going to sew. Okay, it's done. I've finally finished it. Let's have a final look, shall we, before I give it a good press. So you're seeing this before I am. Have I got everything on the right way? I think so. I think so. I love it. I really, really love it. I'm going to give it a press and put it up on my design wall, and then we can have a proper, really good look at it. It's done! Yay! I'm going to give you a nice close-up look. So let me spin the camera around and I'll show you it. I really do absolutely love it. This is not giving any indication as to the size and scale, but hopefully you can enjoy it as much as I am. So let's give you some nice close-up shots, shall we? Home wall hanging by Missouri Star. I've loved every minute of this, from picking fabrics to choosing the little doors and putting it all together, despite the fact that I did a few mishaps yesterday. Today is going to be a better day. But this is the pattern. This comes with the panel. I will put links to this down in the description box below, because I know lots of you are going to want to have a look at this. So it says the finished size is about 39 by 39 approximately, but you could equally add another border around this and make this even bigger, or just keep going and turn it into a giant kind of medallion quilt where you just have rounds and rounds of houses. Ooh, why didn't I think of that? I hope you enjoyed this part 2 of getting this finished. I've enjoyed having you with me. Thank you for keeping me company, and drop any comments or questions in the comments box below. If you've enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you for QuiltTube.